In this video, we're going to discuss hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solutions. These terms can be easily confused by students, so it's important that we are able to distinguish between these three terms. All three of these terms relate to the concentration of solutes that are found in a solution, and this will then determine in which way material will move in terms of diffusion or osmosis. Before we begin talking about hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solutions, we need to define a couple terms, and that would be solute, solvent, and solution. A solute is something that dissolves in a solvent. A solvent is what does the actual dissolving of the solute, and when it's all finished, a solution is what you get. For example, if I were to take salt, a solute, and I mix it with water, a solvent, after a period of time, the salt will have dissolved in the water, and therefore I would have a salt solution. So salt dissolved in water becomes a salt solution. You could talk about Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid packet is the solute, sugar is the solute. You mix the two solutes, the sugar and the Kool-Aid packet into water, which is the solvent. You create a Kool-Aid solution. So it's the same idea. We're going to start with hypertonic first. And when we say hypertonic, we are talking about more solutes. So an easy way to think about this is hyper means more, and tonic, we're going to think of that as solutes. So hypertonic is more solutes. Well, when you talk about more solutes, you have to be talking about more solutes compared to something else. So let's look at our picture up here. We have a hypertonic solution. So here is a cell, this yellow orange thing, inside of some sort of solution, and that's the blue stuff. Well, I can see these little green things, these little green molecules. There's more of them outside the cell and less of them inside the cell. So there's more of the solutes in the solution than there are in the cell. So I would consider this a hypertonic solution. There are more solutes outside than there are inside. So it's having a concentration of solutes, having a higher concentration of salt. So it's having a higher concentration of solutes than another solution or than a cell. Moving on to hypotonic. Hypo means less. So we have less solutes. This would mean having a lower concentration of solutes than another solution or the cell. So when we look at our picture, hypotonic solution, here's our solution, and here's our cell. Well, I can see there's one solute outside the cell in the solution, so therefore there are less solutes in the solution than there are in the cell. So it's a hypotonic solution because there's only one that I can see, and so it's less than the many that are in the cell. That would be a hypotonic solution. Lastly, we have isotonic. An isotonic is equal. We have an equal number of solutes in the solution as we do in the cell. So it's equal on both sides. I want to back this up a bit because when we talk about a hypotonic, when we talk about a hypertonic solution, we're also saying if the solution has more solutes, then that means the cell has less solutes. So what I could say here is that the solution is hypertonic, but the cell is hypotonic because the cell has less solutes than the solution. So this solution is hypertonic, more solutes. The cell is hypotonic, less solutes compared to the solution. If we move on to hypotonic solution, I can see there's one solute out here, so it's hypotonic compared to the cell, but the cell is hypertonic because there's more solutes in the cell than there are outside of the cell. So this solution is hypotonic, but this cell is hypertonic compared to the solution. And obviously, in an isotonic solution, it's equal, so the cell is isotonic to the solution, and the solution is isotonic to the cell. So here's a question. Which solution of these three has more solutes, the green dots, than the cell? We're looking for the word more solute. More be like hyper, solutes is tonic. So the one that has more solutes outside in the solution than the cell would be this one, hypertonic. Looking at a hypertonic situation, if this membrane was permeable to these green molecules and they could move in and they could move out, this side is in a greater concentration. And so these solutes would want to move inside the cell from a higher concentration to lower concentration because of diffusion. So if this were permeable to this solute, these solutes would want to go in the cell. In this case, in a cell that's in a hypotonic solution, these solutes would want to come out because these are in a greater concentration inside the cell, and they would want to move from a high concentration to low concentration. The thing about solutes is that you're also dealing with solvents. And so in a hypertonic solution, you have more solutes outside, but those more solutes actually leave less volume for water or the solvent. So in a hypertonic solution, there are more solutes out here, but less solvent in concentration compared to the inside of the cell. If we were to look at the hypotonic solution, there is only one molecule of solute outside, so we have all of this solvent that's outside of this cell, and therefore there's less solutes outside the cell, but there's more water outside the cell in a hypotonic solution. Now, what does this mean? Well, water moves from the hypotonic area to a hypertonic area. So here's a hypotonic solution. I see one solute, but a whole bunch of solvent out here. So the high concentration of solvent would like to move into the cell from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So water is always going to move from the hypotonic area to the hypertonic area. So in this case, it would move from the hypotonic solution to the hypertonic cell. If we take this back one slide, we can see that this is the hypertonic solution. Therefore, this would be a hypotonic cell. And water always moves from the hypotonic to the hypertonic. So water would leave the cell from this area to this area from a high concentration of water or a high concentration of solvent to a low concentration of solvent. So when we talk about hypertonic, we're talking about more solutes, but that means there's less solvent compared to something else. In here, this would be a hypotonic cell, meaning there's less solutes, but there would be a lot more solvent, and so the solvent would want to exit from the cell outward. So we have a picture here that shows us examples of what would happen to a cell. So these cells here are in a hypotonic solution. So this cell and this cell are in a hypotonic solution. So the water is always moving from a hypotonic situation to a hypertonic situation. So these cells are in a hypotonic solution. That means the water is going to go in the cells. Well, when the water goes in the cells, if it doesn't reach equilibrium, if it's an animal cell, the water will keep coming in and eventually it will burst. If it's a plant cell, the water will come in, and because of the cell wall, it won't burst, but it'll get very turgid or rigid around the side. Now let's go down here to hypertonic. Well, like we said before, water moves from a hypotonic area to a hypertonic area. From an area of less solutes, meaning more water, to an area of more solutes, meaning less water. So this cell is losing water because the water is moving from the hypotonic area inside the cell to the outside, which is the hypertonic solution. So as that happens, the cell loses water and the cell shrinks. And in this case, the plant cell does too, but it doesn't um, uh, get destroyed because it also has the cell wall maintaining its shape. But the inside of the cell is struggling because it is losing water. And in an isotonic situation, you have equal water coming in and out the cell into the solution because you're in an equal solute environment. Therefore, you have an equal water, and therefore you're at equilibrium. So hopefully this has helped you sort out the differences between hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic solutions. Please review these because these seem to be some of the difficult terms that students struggle with in this topic.